Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it may be for you right now. We made it through first week. I hope everything's going well. If you have any questions about navigating stuff or about course content, theories, ideas, let me know. I'm always here for you to answer questions. Make sure we are moving in the right direction. Yeah, okay, so right now I should be fairly well. I don't know, just sort of a general orientation around functionalism and conflict theory and their applications to popular culture. This week is on kind of like looking at culture, kind of defining, explaining culture, and then kind of working in a little bit some different elements of popular culture. So I thought the two podcasts from the Social Breakdown are really good. They're a great way. Podcasts can be a great way to access a lot of information in an entertaining, engaging format. So hopefully you enjoy those podcasts, and we can kind of talk about some themes here in a minute that I want to kind of highlight. I just want to let you know too that in these videos, I'll put together these videos 15, 20, 25 minutes every week just to kind of give you kind of a context around the articles, to kind of get you more familiar with some main ideas and perspectives, provide some food for thought. And then I will include the group wiki post stuff in these videos as well. So the question for the group wiki, the assignment for the group wiki will be in these videos. Okay, so this week is basically, intro to popular culture. It's all about popular. There's one podcast, the other one, Red, White, and Blue, defining American culture. So they start off with this sort of discussion about social constructionism. So let's kind of talk about what that term means. Let's see, I don't have the book in front of me. So Berger and Luckman, a couple of philosophers, 1960s, wrote this book, this treatise on understanding knowledge. It's called the Sociology of Knowledge, is sort of the bigger perspective. And they create it's a 200-page book basically describing how we construct meaning. That nothing has any inherent meaning. We give things meaning. So that's kind of like, the concept, the idea, but, there's 200 pages in the analysis. It gets really complicated. Trying to figure out, where do these meanings come from? How are meanings reinforced? How are they established? Meanings are unstable. Meanings can change. So how do we think about the process of changing meanings? And they bring in this idea of social construction to talk about culture. Culture, things that live in culture are things that we assign meaning to, right? So every nation has a flag. I think every nation except one has a flag. Most of them are in kind of the same shape. There's very few that are in a different shape. But if I showed you an image of a flag that was red, green, and white, we probably wouldn't even be able to locate what country that nation's flag, the nation of that particular flag. There's no meaning. We don't have any meaning associated with it. This reminds me of a colleague of mine who was traveling in Germany, and he was riding his bike, and he noticed that there was a Confederate flag, big Confederate flag flying in a rural community, kind of a rural area outside, this flag was flying outside of someone's house. So he's kind of curious. He's like, that's kind of, didn't expect to see the Confederate flag here in the middle of rural Germany. So the person, the homeowner was outside. So he asked the owner, said, hey, what's the story on the flag? What's, why display the Confederate flag? And for this German, he thought they were getting ready for a country music festival, and the connections he made was that, the Confederate flag, that means country music. Of course, from our sensibilities, we can kind of look at, the Confederate flag holds different meaning for different people. It's a flag with a lot of contested meaning. It's a flag that can be very divisive from looking at sort of trying to create national unity and racial healing. Or healing over racial injustice. So, it's an item of culture that sort of demonstrates this sort of idea that it's socially constructed meaning, right? And different individuals, groups, based on location, region, class, social class, race, gender, all these different things start to influence the meaning that we give things. And that I like their idea, this concept of invested meanings. We develop invested meanings over things. So we start to become really invested in the meanings of these particular objects. So we become socialized into culture, right? It's an example or illustration of socialization into culture itself. A little bit of discussion about the difference between high and low culture and then popular culture. I thought they did a pretty good job sort of talking about that, but I got a little bit different perspective to offer. I mean, it's overlapping, but some nuances that are important. So the distinction between high and low culture goes back. Let's just say before the 1960s, there was a distinction: the high culture, which they define, the culture for the elite, so for the educated, right? So going to the opera, it's a physical space, it's an event, it's a practice. Sometimes, that's high culture. Low culture would be basically the rest, the masses, culture for the masses. Popular culture, I would add or clarify that, they bring up this idea that popular culture has things like it's the lowest common denominator. It appeals for the masses. It's more global in nature. Those are all true. I think the other thing about popular culture is a commercial enterprise. That becomes an important part, or different degrees of commercial enterprise. I mean, that's what, it's going to have to, that's going to have to enter the discussion of popular culture. And then they bring in Bourdieu, and Pierre Bourdieu, kind of well known for taste cultures, how we develop habits. He calls it the habitus, and then taste cultures. And it's super fascinating. Wine, it's like, the wine culture, knowing the language, knowing, the presentation of wine. I mean, that's a lot of sort of social learning going on. And what Bourdieu is interested in is sort of the social class, kind of class distinction happens through what we consume. Or the habits that we develop, the practices that we engage in. Like we pick up on different aspects of culture in order to distinguish ourselves from different groups. There's sort of this class distinction thing. A couple terms I think are important too, as they talk about globalization and the impact of, America. And America is like, it's kind of, unique in that America's unique in that regard of the influence on the global community in terms of our culture and its influence. And I think we take that for granted. I think we forget that. We don't think about that. The degree in which, America dominates in terms of cultural influence around the world. You could talk about it in terms of cultural diffusion, that more and more culture is getting diffused. And in some ways, it's, the world is becoming smaller and more homogenized. So it's become more Americanized. I think that's not only homogenized, but homogenized in very particular ways. So we can talk about cultural diffusion, but another term is cultural imperialism, which is a more conflict theory term maybe, but this idea that it's not only diffusing culture, it's colonizing other countries through, when McDonald's comes into a country, there's been backlash against transnational corporations, American corporations, because it's not only bringing a product, it's bringing an idea, ideology of consumption and consumerism, gender ideologies that are part of that, individualism that's part of the value that's packaged underneath this sort of consumption items. So it's culture can be powerful when it's moving around the world, right? So when we think about national culture, but we can also think about global culture, and we think about the interaction between those two. And then we can think about sort of regional culture or our social groups that we belong to and the culture within that. And then finally, or one more thing about, the podcast, the first podcast, is this idea of soft power. I'm not sure if you made the connection, but think about hegemony, Antonio Gramsci, and the idea about hegemony, domination by consent. That would be somewhat like this sort of idea of soft power that's there. Okay, so what else want to sort of talk about? A couple different things that I think are important. Culture is performed, culture is demonstrated. That's an important element. And there's a distinction between ideal culture and practice culture. So ideal culture is, what we want it to be, right? So it's idealized form, the promise, right? The mythology that we have in terms of a culture or a place. And then there's the reality, the practice culture or the real culture. And the distance between two, so you think about, one of the values that we, strong value for in the United States is equality of opportunity. So that's our ideal. But our practice, we have a lot of shortcomings in terms of that. And those shortcomings differ depending on where you are at in terms of race, class, gender, other areas of life. That distance between ideal and practice can be very significant or not much. So if you are part of the dominant class in terms of you are cisgender white male, you're born in a background of a lot of privilege. The ideal culture and the practice culture is pretty well aligned. I mean, it's fairly consistent. But you can start to see there's going to be major differences between ideal and practice culture when we look at different groups within society itself. And I think that's important to keep in mind. That's why that question they raise about, where are you from, I think is an interesting one to ponder and think about sort of what does that mean, and how we sort of think through that. What I want you to do for the wiki for this week is to find 3 examples of culture that could be images, videos, short videos. Always keep in mind being respectful. The community that we're trying to create within the group wiki, or any communication fostering awareness, information versus division, separation, antagonism, or anything like that. So being respectful is important. Provide 3 examples. Could be images, links to things, and then discuss sort of why these illustrate culture. So 3 examples of culture, either American culture, global culture, a particular nation that you may be familiar with, and sort of different expressions of culture. I'll kind of walk you through some, I don't know, I was just trying to think about an example I could provide for you. Okay, so this is a hat I bought in Cuba from years ago. I mean, it is basically, you notice there's no, actually I had my mom sew that in there because of my bald head. The straw was kind of itchy, so my mom put this in there for me. So there's no logo, right? There's no logo. It's pretty simple. It's hand. I can tell you the difference. The production process probably came from Cuba, so it's not imported. It's going to be local labor went into this, local materials went into this. But from a Marxist perspective, it's relatively non-alienated labor. The difference between the manufacturer and the seller, that distance is and the consumer, that distance is very short. So that's Cuba, okay? So you look at that and it's like, oh, you mean in Mongolia, you wouldn't have a hat like this, right? So clothing is an example of culture, right? So here's another example. I was in Spain. Our family went to Spain last summer. 2 summers ago, bought this in Spain. Notice that that's not a logo. It's just sort of saying it's made out of paper. But a little bit different, right? A little bit kind of fedora style, maybe. Color's a little bit different. But again, no logo. And the material, I mean, you can't feel the material, but there's something physical. The physical aspects of that are different. And then this is a hat bought from the Gorn Hat Company up in Portland. So Gorn is a hat company. I don't know if they're global or not, but it's a big company. You can say big company, but it's a mass manufactured hats. And here you go, Gorn Brothers, right? Gorn Brothers. Quality is different. We could start to make these distinctions, like thinking about Bordeaux and taste culture. The clothes we wear, we have to know what to wear, in terms of marking our class position. Carhartt, super fascinating, right? We associate Carhartt. Like working class clothing, like that's a branding and marketing, right? We're sort of creating these taste cultures around not only clothing, but food and style and language and appearance. I mean, it's like rich with information that we can sort of examine culture. So that's the idea to kind of go after. All right. Hope all's well. Hope you're enjoying things. Yeah, be safe, be well. Catch you next week. Take care.